Let's talk a little bit more about how this issue of gun control is playing out, because there have been a lot of discussions since this terrible shooting on Friday that left 20 young children dead as well as adults in Newtown, Connecticut. And the question is how it gets played out. And although it does seem a bit cynical, this is exactly the way it happens when people start figuring out, all right, what are the angles and what do we do? Alan Kelly joined us often during the campaign and does occasionally join us also to talk about these plays, if you will. Alan, of course, is the founder of Playmaker Systems. He also teaches a course on political strategy and simulation. He'll be doing that next month at George Washington University at GWU. And, of course, he tweets at Playmaker Alan. Alan, welcome back. Thanks for being here this morning.
Good morning, Tim.
First of all, these are, the first thing we saw on Friday, I think, aside from this, terrible, the condolences and so on, was the back and forth between individuals who were saying this is not the time to talk about something like this, and others who said this is exactly the time to talk about something like this. There's an awful lot that's floating around in the ether. Maybe you can sort of make some sense of it to us.
Well, what you initially saw were people staking out their positions. I mean, this is gun control or shootings or anything of this nature. Very, very quickly to our values, and values are things that we believe in and want to discuss and want to advance. And if you do that, if you're into that territory, you're into the realm of influence. And so, what we're talking about, what I study, what I teach, is a system that helps us to break down the row and the seat number, precisely the strategy that is behind the moves or the counter moves and the motivations. And so what you just described were two parties employing a strategy that is simply called a recast. They're recasting, maybe they're doing something called filtering. They're attempting to put forth what they think are the most salient facts according to their opinions or positions.
Okay.
So that was the starting gambit, if you will.
A couple of the plays that you mentioned specifically, and Alan writes about this online too. Parents and teachers go into a fiat. The madness has to stop. What's a fiat?
Well, a fiat is that name, sort of funny name we give to just an expression of facts or of just laying out some declaration. Hence, we call it a fiat, and it's really one of the more benign strategies in the system. But it's there. It's just simply to say this is this and this is that, and you very often see that. In fact, at the beginning, at the front end of some sort of debate or discussion, just people laying out particular points.
Now, interesting you use the word strategy, because we don't associate that necessarily with parents who are grieving in a situation like this, but you're talking about now influence. People want something done. So is it in that general context? It's not as if they represent an organization, anything other than just their own personal interests. But when you're talking about influence, these are sometimes unconscious plays that are played. Is that how you look at it?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that someone who stands in front of a camera and says, God bless these children while they cry, or says that we have to stop this, I don't think they believe that, they're running plays on anybody. But the effect is to enter into and to add into the discussion really a point of view, which is part of the whole influential and influence, matrix that gets people going. So, yeah, in their case, it is absolutely unconscious, but it doesn't mean that we can't know precisely what it is and what effects it has.
Alan Kelly with us as we were talking about the plays related to this gun control response and also the shooting on Friday in Newtown, Connecticut. And let's talk about some of the players here in Washington. The president, for example, who made a tearful statement the other night. Of course, he spoke at the memorial service, and the president in that said that we're going to have to come together, take meaningful action to prevent more tragedies like this, regardless of the politics. He sounded like he was speaking in a very comprehensive fashion. What plays was he running when he was speaking?
I think you'd have to say that play was a testing play, specifically that we call a ping. It's just simply the name that we give to the heavy hint, if you will. And what's interesting about that is that as we arrange these strategies, this is a very, very low engagement. It's very much to not ironically the left side of the spectrum, where he's just simply testing the waters. He's beginning to try out or hint at where he may go with this. So it was a detectable ping that he was running that to say, this is on my radar. This is easily going to be make the my second term agenda.
Let's hear a little bit more. And here's the majority leader of the Senate, who, by the way, has a record of gun ownership that is pretty much along the lines of the NRA position. But here's the Democratic Senate Majority Leader yesterday.
We have no greater responsibility than keeping our most vulnerable and most precious resource, our children, safe. And every idea should be on the table as we discuss how best to do just that.
Alan Kelly, this is not too dissimilar from other messages we're hearing from members of Congress who are talking for a re-examination of the laws. What kind of a play is Senator Reid running here?
Well, it's very interesting. He may well also be pinging. He could be using a play we call a trial balloon, where he's lofting, a more specific idea, looking for reaction, so that he can measure that reaction. I think that Reid, because his background and his position, on guns is relatively well known. You can't discount the possibility that the play is something Chris Matthews calls, the hanging of a lantern. You shine a lantern on your own problems. In other words, he's sort of self-disclosing. He's saying, you may find it ironic for me to say this, but So they try to get the bad news out, if you will, or they try to adjust the context now so that they can speak credibly later.
I thought it's interesting that you note that the media coverage of this has pretty much done all it can to perhaps oversimplify, but certainly to simplify the message of the president. In other words, equating when the president is talking about more action with gun control, he was, I think, probably referring to a bit more comprehensive approach, a look at cultural causes, a look at mental health, a look at some other things. But you write that the presidential ping was all newsrooms needed to reduce Sandy Hook to the well-worn label, gun control. Perhaps it was the obvious frame, but the phrase is incendiary and the facts were not in. So what role is the media playing in this, if you'll pardon the overuse of the word play, as this is taking place and influence here?
I think the media is playing a central role in this. I don't think they had a good enough excuse to roll out to start labeling all of their programs and all of their features and interviews and commentary gun control. I think that most anybody could sit back and reasonably argue that this is not necessarily about an inanimate object that can't speak, a gun, but it is easily about hate, or it is easily about fear, or it is easily about Hollywood, or it is easily about these larger and really bigger and hairier and tougher issues to address that are arguably creating the context for shootings, whether it is the impressionable madman or something less. I think what's ironic to me is that we really quickly want to run to and talk about guns and gun control, but of all the things we could talk about, guns are the one thing that can't talk back to us. And the NRA, of course, isn't speaking.
Well, that was going to be my next question, because I think this is fascinating, and you call it, this is the pause.
Yes.
This is the play here. The NRA is not saying anything. They took down their Facebook page, and I think that their reaction to this is what? Is it just a waiting it out sort of? Is that what the pause is about?
Yeah, and by and large, it's a very smart strategy for an implicated or for a participating party to run. It buys you time. It gives you just a little bit of a few news cycles to think, to gather information, so that you are communicating and taking your position, with real knowledge and real facts rather than reactively. That could get you in trouble. The downside, of course, to the infamous pause is that it has a very, very short shelf life, and for the player that's really in the heat of a particular moment, they can only do that for so long.
Isn't that somewhat determined by other events, though? For example, the fiscal cliff, now that there's a thought of a possible New Deal, I believe that a lot of newsrooms are hoping to get off of this issue of gun control, and they want to move on because it's an issue that's been trod many times before. There's no expectation that much happens. That's a fresher story. In addition to that, people are still in the mindset of Christmas right now. As tragic as this is, there's the sense that a lot of people want to move on to this, and I wonder if the pause is something that'll last them right through the holidays.
It could easily. you're very right. The NRA or people who want this issue to go away, whatever their politics or preferences, could easily rely on holiday spirit, holiday news, fiscal cliff, debt ceilings, and all these things to buy them cover so they can continue to pause or just simply to pass and get out of it. I don't have the sense that may happen, though. The mobilization against this particular one is pretty big. And there are some very powerful players changing their position, running these lantern plays like Harry Reid. There are very powerful players running call-outs and very factually oriented strategies that we call a mirror. I think that's going to make it very difficult, and I think the NRA is probably, the NRA in particular, has probably gone too far and waited too long. It does seem to me that if I'm them, I could easily come out and I could say, okay, we'll talk about guns and we'll talk about their control, but we have to speak to a larger issue. What about the fear? What about the hate? How is it that we come to have this sort of environment whereby people pull that trigger on that thing we represent?
Well, it eventually comes down to solutions, right, which is what people are looking for. They're not looking for it's not about the gun control. It's about keeping this from happening. And the question is whether or not any of the laws that they're discussing would prevent this sort of thing from happening, and how do we get to there? I think that's ultimately what people are looking for. That's just my interpretation of this.
Well, I think in the end, we all have ourselves to blame. It is our society, it is our environment, it is what has happened with really a lot of thought and a lot of regulations and a lot of incidents. And I think the can gets kicked a lot, and I think the NRA, if and when they do come out, I think they are going to kick it down to some very, very big issues, not just mental health, but I think they're going to talk about entertainment. I think they're going to talk about media effects. I think they're going to talk about the media's responsibility in this, because they're so prone to dramatize. And ultimately you got to sit back and say, you know what, we are all to blame. And I think that we probably have to take a more holistic issue. But that's a different issue than influence strategy.
All right. Well, there's still a lot to read about at Playmaker Alan if you want to tweet. But Alan Kelly, CEO, founder, Playmaker Systems, teaching at GW again in the next quarter. So we look forward to getting the benefit of some of those students being thrown out there into the great big wide world a lot smarter than they went in to Alan's class. Alan, is as always, great to have you on. And if I don't catch up with you, have a great holiday, okay?
Thank you, Tim. You too.